Hi, Steve Adubato here. You saw Gayle King over there. Her colleague, along with Norah O'Donnell, is here with us right now. John Dickerson, co-host of CBS This Morning on what time?
It's on at 7 to 9.
Hold on, why do you laugh at that?
Because it's my days, have started early and different, and I'm still getting used to it.
How early do you get up?
About 4.
4.
Yeah.
Faced the Nation 2.5 years. You were there.
Yeah. So that started at 10:30. That's why, and then check your local listings because it starts at different times, different places.
When you got the call to come in and join these two terrific broadcasters and fill that slot, that place, did they know right away, hey, we want Dickerson here, or was it they were testing people out? I
think, I don't know exactly what was happening on their end. On my end, it was, it's obviously a big difference going from having your own show. But it was, once I started doing the sort of pros and cons list, the way they teach you to, there were a lot of things that lined up in the pro column. And it's just amazing, you think if you open the newspaper in the morning and you look at a bunch of different stories and you think, I want to talk about this one, I want to have somebody on to talk about that one. And then you get to have this conversation with, as you mentioned, 2 great journalists as well. So that was really, that excitement of being able to do that every day, that's really what drew me.
Both of those broadcasters, Gayle and Norah, have sat right there, and they were just great with us. And I was telling you before we got on the air that I saw you guys the other morning, and I thought chemistry is really there. Yeah. Did you sense it? And then not a lot of scripted. I'm sure you have to throw to some pieces at times,
right.
But did you immediately feel like, hey, we're comfortable with each other?
Well, I think it's interesting you mentioned that. I mean, I think my bosses did. That's one of the reasons why they thought, because, I was doing a very different kind of show in Washington. So it's not like when there were some people who thought, this is not like the progression, it wouldn't necessarily be the one you'd think of. But I certainly feel incredibly comfortable with both of them, and have in part because for the last several years, while I was doing Face the Nation, and even then before that, I was on the show a lot, and I was at that round table, and it was always this feeling that, when the conversation had to end because we were done for time, we always continued it. And so it feels, in a sense, like picking up that old conversation, but
obviously
in a new format.
So you've covered, by way of background, let folks know your family background and its connection to journalism.
Sure. My mother, Nancy Dickerson, Nancy Hodgman, for your viewers who know her from the early days, was a correspondent for CBS, the first female correspondent for CBS News, and then was at NBC, and then did documentaries after that. So.
Did you know this was going to be a professional life?
No. In fact, you probably until... Well, I was in magazine, right? I was in print for 25 years. And so, but even that would have been something that would have surprised me even until I was out of college.
So what did you think you were going to do?
I thought I'd be a writer of longer form things, of books, and maybe be an English professor or a lawyer. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. But I came to New York after college and worked for Time magazine as a secretary. And once I saw what they were doing there, I thought I want to be a part of that.
So let's fast forward. Talking about trying to make sense of the Donald Trump presidency, particularly interaction and relationship with the media. Describe it.
Well, it's as contentious as we've had since probably the Nixon era, where there's a conscious effort by the president. Presidents and the press always butt heads. That's the point. That's why we're there.
Sure.
But,
how is this different?
Well, this is different because there's a much more contentious ongoing relationship, and the press is used as a foil by the president in a much more systematic way than we've had with previous presidencies. Presidents have worked with the press and worked against the press in minor little ways, but as a part of the daily strategy, we really kind of haven't seen this in this kind of ongoing way since probably Nixon.
So when you're around some of your friends who have different political views, and they accuse you, because I know they do, because I've been accused of it, and I'm sure you have too, of being part of a concerted effort of the media to take down this president. They have, because you don't only talk to people in the media, and we don't all have the same political ideology. So my point is, do you have that discussion, or do you avoid it?
Oh, yeah, no, I have it all the time with regular voters, too, that I talk to, regular civilians, who are the more important people to talk to, because you're always at some level going to get political experts for the party of the president saying, you guys are out to get him.
I'm not talking about those.
Yeah, but regular people, real people think, you're out to get the president. Now, people on the left think you're not out to get him enough. And so there's been a lot of that in the past in my career. We are at a new situation now, though, with this particular president for sure, both because of the way he runs the White House and because of the kind of nature of the way he stirred up the country. But we're also in this place because the country has stirred itself up. The country is much more partisan than it was when I started in this business. And so people are ready to fight in a way that is distinct from President Trump. So there's kind of two factors there.
John, the question of truth, right? Great quote that I'm sure you know, the first casualty of war is truth, right? Was said about many, many wars ago. Is it harder to identify what is true, accurate, in this environment, the whole fake news thing? Here's my question, I promise you this one. You have said that truth has been a huge casualty in this White House.
Well, it's in this White House and also in this media environment. I mean, it's not just this White House. Certainly we have a president who has created a new standard for saying things that aren't so. I mean,
intentionally?
Well, I think in some cases intentionally, in some cases of omission, in some cases he's uninformed about the specifics of the case. It is hard to know. But there are certainly cases in which he said things he knows to be untrue, and he said them anyway for effect. So that's a specific and particular case of this president. But we are also in, and so I don't want to miss that, but the second point I want to make is also important, which is we are also in an environment, a media environment, where the competition to say something first is so rushed that people go out and they say things that they haven't double-checked. And that adds to a diminution of respect for the press. And then the other thing I would say is that this president and others have made a point of saying that the press is out to get them. And so that all of the natural things that happen when you're covering a moving story, which is things shift. There is a group of people now who want to make those shifts, which are natural in our human understanding. We start here and we learn and we end up here. They want to make that natural shift seem like something sinister, as opposed to the natural thing that occurs when you're learning more information, you're building on it, you're correcting, you're adding context. That's what we do. That's what happens in news. You know, it's the first draft of history, to bring out another quote, and people have to see it in that context, as opposed to that first draft, if it's wrong in any small way, to say, well, it's wrong completely.
You know, it's so interesting. You very rarely have a chance to ask a president a direct question. I told you before we got on the air, there's a clip, a pretty famous clip of you at a White House press conference. You were covering the White House. Excuse me, and George Bush was the president. I told you I was teaching a class in media over at NYU. And I remember using this clip to say, there was a lot going on in it. Here's the point. You asked President Bush to identify, I think, his biggest mistake or one mistake, and what happened after that? It was in a crowded press conference.
Yeah, that's right. It was in the East Room, and it was a presidential press conference, and I was working for Time magazine at the time. And you know, when you work for a news magazine, you know you're not going to get the first question, so you're going to get the one later. And so the question was, and this is something I still write about today: as a president, you're never allowed to admit mistakes. But as a human,
even if you know you've made one.
Even if you know you made one, because voters don't let you, the press doesn't let you. But if you're a human being, the success in life, and you saw Gayle King actually say it, is you got to always be learning. And how do you learn? Is you learn from mistakes. I can tell you some I made this morning that I'm already learning from. So how does a president do that? And what do they identify? And how do they learn from it? And so that was the question. And it was not a setup. The president actually, I prefaced it by talking about, he was asked a version of that question on the campaign trail, and he said that trading Sammy Sosa when he was a partial owner of the Rangers.
Actually, that was in your question. You said, Mr. President, you said trading Sammy Sosa when he was, and you said, well, give us an example, and he just stammered.
Yeah, that's right.
He had nothing.
He didn't have an answer, and it's funny. So I talked to him later about this, and he said, what I thought you were trying to get me to say, and this was not my intent, but this is what he thought it was. And George Bush did that a lot. He did a lot of anticipating what he thought you wanted to hear, which is sometimes a trap. And in this case, he thought I was trying to get him to say that the Iraq War was a mistake.
Well, it's interesting. The reason I asked you that question is because with President Trump, and listen, folks, whatever point of view you have, that's your business. Here at Public Television, we're not looking, and we do not advocate any political ideology. But I will say this. As a student of leadership who's written about it, who's taught it, I'm curious. If you asked that question of President Trump, do you think he would acknowledge any mistake?
I don't think so. And
I think he sees it as a weakness.
I think that's right. I think he sees it as a weakness. And also, he recognizes the public role of this. And this is why it's interesting. George Bush had trouble in that moment because he actually tried to answer the question. I think that President Trump would recognize that as a public leader, and also given his own view of himself and his success, and that he's always part of his brand building is to say, I'm the best,
You can be the best and still make mistakes.
That's right. And that's a more, when you read history of the people who have achieved greatness, all of them have some sense of self-reflection because they have to be able to adapt to new environments. And presidents have to adapt particularly because there is no training for the job. So you're always on the job training. And if you don't know what you've made mistakes, you can't learn to do the job well.
So, John, I have to do this. What was the most significant mistake you've made?
Well, there are a lot of them.
Could you just give us one here
so
for our vast public television and FiOS
well,
audience?
I can tell you one I made today.
I can name
So
10,
we were
but go ahead.
talking, we were on the show this morning, we were talking about this horrible school shooting. And
we're taping right after the horrific events in Florida.
So I just didn't, I was so caught up in thinking about something else, I wasn't paying attention to what was happening in the moment, which you're talking to the student, one of the students and the teacher. Not recognizing the need to be in the moment. You got a lot of planning, a lot of things going on, but you're talking about this incredible story about this teacher who saved 60 kids maybe,
That's right.
and a kid that was in the class. So not being in the moment is a thing to be reminded of, even when you think you've got a lot of other things going on about later in the show and all kinds of other stuff. So.
I want to thank you for being in this particular moment with us, John. And you mind if I tell folks when they can catch you again?
Sure, of course.
John Dickerson is the co-host, along with Nora O'Donnell and Gail King, who you see in our Open every time you watch One-on-One. Every morning from 7 to 9, CBS co-host of CBS This Morning. And I want to thank you, not just for being here, but for everything you've done as a journalist and broadcaster for the reputation of our industry. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate that.
Stay right
Thanks
there.
a lot.
Be right back right after this.
One-on-One with Steve Adubato has been a production of the Caucus Educational Corporation, celebrating over 25 years of broadcast excellence. This special edition of One-on-One with Steve Adubato is brought to you from the Tisch WNET studios at Lincoln Center. Funding has been provided by Georgian Court University, New Jersey Sharing Network, New Jersey Resources, TD Bank, the New Jersey Office of the Insurance Fraud Prosecutor, Verizon, and by United Airlines. Transportation provided by Airbrook Limousine, serving the metropolitan New York, New Jersey area.